Less than 36 hours ago from shooting this video, Joe Rogan has published his over 3-hour-long conversation with Katt Williams. By the end of this video, you're going to be able to understand what Joe and Katt did to make an interview that we thought was never going to happen.
That would be like me being on Joe Rogan. Joe don't want me on there. I need to be on Shannon. Joe got 6 comedians that never been funny. He want to push out. But that's really how it is. I'm so sorry I'm competitive.
Turned into an interview like this.
They literally call it a hobbit. It was like a 3-foot-tall person that was covered in hair, smaller head than us, used tools.
As a preteen, I knew that Atlantis really existed.
Let's hop into it. Real quick before we get started, it's important for me to note that you can watch the conversation in full at PowerfulJRE, his YouTube channel. I'm going to be sharing short clips from the first second all the way to the very end, but I'll include the link in the description below. In addition to that, I want us to understand Katt Williams as a communicator in general. So I'm going to be sharing some clips from his Club Shay Shay episode. That episode went viral, like incredibly viral. 60 million views for a single video podcast episode on YouTube. I don't think I've ever seen that before. I'll include the links in the description below as well. And the last thing is, if you like content like this, I do all types of communication analysis, from Vladimir Putin and Tucker Carlson to Jordan Peterson and Kobe Bryant and now Katt Williams and Joe Rogan. The centralizing thread between it all is I believe that we can not only listen to this stuff, but we can learn from it. And my goal is to be able to create content that helps us all do that. So I'd love for you to subscribe. And without further ado, let's see how it starts.
Good night, all day. What's up?
How are you?
I can't believe we never met each other until today. That's kind of crazy.
I'm going to stop it right here real quick because I want to see what the rhetorical setting is. I like to do this at the beginning of all of our breakdowns because it matters where they are and their surroundings. So I've always thought this was interesting about Joe Rogan's studio. Their table is quite large. I know that I've heard him say initially he had a smaller table and then he had Mike Tyson on as a guest, and that experience wanted him to get a little more space in between him and his guest. But I would say like a 5-6 foot table, it puts them out of the intimate space and into the social space. And this changes conversation. For instance, if you compare this to whenever he went on Club Shay Shay, there really isn't much separating them. They have the skinny table, the cognac, but this setting with the fireplace behind them is going to produce a different vibe and really a different conversation than the Joe Rogan experience. Also, the podcast mics in front of your face, the overhead ears, which will kind of make you feel like you're in a different area with the guest. Compared to Club Shay Shay, you have no overhead ears. You don't have any podcast mics. I imagine they have lapel mics.
It will tell you when.
Okay, so he has a lapel there. And then Shannon Sharp has a small lapel too. Right there. And just looking at the plane of the video, I also imagine that they're using some type of boom mic up top. But Joe's studio is different, and it's a bit more chill and laid back. And I think that does impact the conversation. Also, another thing that I want to mention from the very front is
it's really weird. It's kind of crazy. It was always like at the store,
studio
like last night. I'm like, fuck. It was always 2 ships in the night.
Is consistently filled with smoke. I'll show you a good instance of this. It'll pan back and forth, and oftentimes you will see both characters shrouded in smoke. For some,
that he took rounding the
look at that. This may not matter, but I do think it affects conversations. Obviously, just like alcohol affected the conversation here, I imagine smoking is going to affect the conversation. And I think they say it. I picked it out. They both take turns saying, is this the weed talking? Is this marijuana talk?
Specifically for that location on this planet. For
What do you think it was powered
usage.
by?
The hot water springs underneath it.
So it was powered by the hot water springs? And to what end? How do you know all this, first of all? Is this marijuana talk?
So they share a laugh with that. And then Katt Williams says the same thing to Joe.
Medical, botanical, alchemical, and magical writings, and the religio-philosophical hermetica comprising of mystical philosophical writings. Holy shit.
Is this weed talk, Joseph?
No, this is so legit.
So the same thing. And as he's trying to read like one of the most complex Wikipedia articles, but this definitely impacts the conversation because the vibe is much different. Also, we see the same thing in the Club Shay Shay episode because rather than saying, is this the weed talking? It's more of like, oh, this must be the alcohol talking. I think there are a couple moments just within the first, what is this, 20
Truth
minutes?
is the light.
I can have my normal these.
Amen, amen.
Shit. Oh. I kind of get on there.
Right.
After that, I don't really kind of know where to go. Let me one more time. Oh.
So it's funny because whenever you are drinking with someone or you're smoking with someone, it creates a shared experience. And in conversation, that adds something to either talk about or it adds something to almost blame the content on. So you could be sharing something really deep and also blame it on the alcohol. Oh, I was drunk, or I was high, or it all has an impact. So I didn't want us to miss that because I feel like some people will watch the Joe Rogan Experience and be like, oh, they were both stoned out of their minds. And that's why a lot of these things happened. I think it certainly has an impact, but there are similarities between this and that, even though total different setting. But I'll go back to the start, the first 30 seconds.
Like, comedy is small, but only if you're mediocre. It's big. It's a vast, vast place.
It's vast and it's also small because there's so few of us. And worldwide, we were talking about this the other day.
So I was curious about how this was going to start because a viral clip went around. I shared it in the intro, but I'll share it again. And it's Katt Williams talking about how Joe Rogan does not want him on the podcast.
Geist. That would be like me being on Joe Rogan. Joe don't want me on there. I need to be on Shannon. Joe got 6 comedians that never been funny. He want to push out.
So they share a laugh about it, but it makes you wonder when you say this podcast host doesn't want me on his podcast, and then 2 months later you're on the podcast, like how would it start? But they start by connecting over commonality. Not only are they both comics, but they share a laugh saying there's very few of us. What are they, how many?
Maybe 500 of us
500
on the planet. You know, you got to be real generous and say 500 because it's really probably about 250.
Right.
Like legit.
So connecting over commonality, that's a great way to start the conversation. Within the first 5 minutes, we hop around to a whole bunch of different conversations, be it about cars.
That thing is insane. That thing is insane. Just the way the doors open up, the way the doors close when you touch the brakes.
Joe's talking about Katt's car and how he really likes it. But the conversation begins to really get in the nitty and gritty about 5 minutes in.
Just 100 years from now, I think automated driving will be mandatory. I really do. I think we're about 100 years away. 100 years away from no personal automobiles. No control of your vehicle. We're going to stop all crashes. We could stop all crashes and all highway deaths. Come on, Katt. Won't you contribute and give up all...
And immediately Joe does what he does best and starts putting out a reflective thought. One thing that strikes me about Katt Williams is he labels himself and he identifies as a truth teller. We saw this a lot in Club Shay Shay. There were several moments where you heard the word truth and he advocated for truth. I'll show you some examples.
And the reason I had to come is because you made a safe place for the truth to be told. You know what I mean?
Thank you.
He says the reason why he came to Club Shay Shay is because he wanted to be able to tell the truth. So that is his intent. But Katt Williams talks a lot about truth.
Content, because that's all you know me for, is that I'm quite likely to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God. All lies will be exposed. That's all. And anyone who takes that the wrong way, know why they take it the wrong way. The truth is the light.
And now I know what these.
The truth is the light. All lies will be exposed.
Content, because that's all you know me for, is that I'm quite likely to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
The vibe of I'm here to tell the truth matches Shannon Sharpe's vibe, because what Shannon Sharpe did, he walks in, if you can, I didn't touch this, but at the very beginning, if you look at his cue cards, he has so many notes. And this creates a structure for the podcast. Now, when we move over to the Joe Rogan podcast, Joe does not have, let's go back to that wide view. There is no notes there. So their conversation does not have a structure. It's incredibly free-flowing. And rather than being a truth teller, Katt Williams takes on a different role, and that's an information presenter. Throughout this podcast, he says the word information over 40 times. I'll show you some examples of how he uses the word information.
And it's not really about knowing anything. It's about where to go to get the information. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you follow information about humankind, you find out that in all parts of history, people were coming to this region for their information and their knowledge and their things that were forbidden, and these were not
I'm going to skip ahead 20 seconds.
insane, right? like even Tesla says that this is where he came to get the information. But if you follow that information pathway, it leads you to this care.
So within about 40 seconds, we hear information 4 times.
Yeah, because it's all about information. And
it's all about information. He says it again.
Test it out. Mercifully, from over this worth. Money.
Tells you what to do and how to live. In every society.
Information. That's what they give.
They give you information. Yeah.
So we see information is the focus here. And taking on this role of being the informer, the person with the knowledge, or being the truth teller. Both of those are very interesting roles. They're both rhetorical roles. They contribute to how we navigate conversation, and they're enticing. We want to be able to know the truth as listeners, and we also want to be able to know the information that's going to help us. Another burden about being a truth teller is you may feel like you need to be more disagreeable, because naturally we associate someone who's contrarian with someone who's going to show us something we haven't seen and shine light on something that's been in the dark. And I noticed it in this conversation. Several times, Katt disagrees with Joe. And I know it's a 3-hour-long conversation. Of course, they're not going to agree about everything. But it is part of his communication style. I'll show you some examples of exactly what I'm talking about.
Be in some sort of competition. There must be something that motivates them. And so,
right, but at that level, competition is healthy, and there are no unhealthy components. So, not hopefully, definitely. Once we're
phone with no cord. He's out on the beach. This is insane. To everybody having a phone.
But not to everybody, because those in the ham radio community and people with the CBs, they didn't feel like that was cutting edge, because it really wasn't. Like I'm saying, in his head, can he still have a superhero, or is he one of them? You know, he's one of them. Like,
If you're the richest dude in the world and you're also a super genius, how the fuck do you stop yourself from thinking you're a superhero? That's the big question.
No, it's not like that.
No?
No, it doesn't have superhero side effects to it.
Must be horrific.
No more,
You're
no,
freaking-
no more horrific than anyone else's.
I know, but there's something about the choice of being, thousands of feet under the water.
No, it's
and
being a
knowing it's
billionaire.
crushing you.
Their laugh is contagious.
Back at the time when they thought people were just using sticks and stones and hunter-gatherers.
No, because the whole time they were saying that it was there.
Yep. That's the one they shot down. Look at that. So it's just a balloon with solar power and some kind of camera. How weird.
Not weird. Not weird.
Well, not weird if you just think about human patterns. You've got to see what the enemy's up to.
And I've just shared a few of these instances, but with each of these disagreements, typically Joe Rogan's like, okay, and moves on. But I do think that's attached to this idea of being the truth teller or being informant. And I think that can be hard. I think it can be a lot of pressure because you may feel like you need to have a new content or a new perspective on each conversation. And I could be totally wrong here, but it was an interesting trend that I saw. With the Shannon Sharpe side, it was about like, give me the truth about Steve Harvey, give me the truth about Kevin Hart. But then whenever you pivot to the Joe Rogan experience, it's much more about conceptual and these thoughts. And whenever we're dealing in the thought realm, then we want information. For instance, look at the difference between the questions that Shannon Sharpe was asking versus the questions that Joe Rogan was asking.
True. And there are hundreds of witnesses for each thing I'm saying.
So let me ask you this. What is your relationship with Steve Harvey, Ricky Smiley, and Cedric the Entertainer as you sit here currently?
They will have to say what I have to say.
Have you ever been
all truth.
Have you ever been on tour with any of these guys? You say have you ever spent time in jail?
All these questions are very pointed. I imagine he has them all on his cards. Now, when you compare this to the questions that Joe's asking, the difference is crazy. Joe Rogan has been doing this. This is episode 2111. So 2,111 times. He's already published another episode after this, and this is less than 36 hours old. One of his skills is that he can sit and talk on a microphone for a very long time. But I've also heard this as a criticism. Potentially he has a guest on and he talks more than they do. But one of the good things about this is when he's talking, he sets up a platform for a lot of conversations to launch from. And this can be really good. We call it conversational threading because it takes a little pressure off the guest to have to come up with new content for 3 hours. I'll show you some examples of Joe doing this.
A higher life form, some more intelligent, emotionless being. And that's the scary thought, is that all this life out there is life that was created by biological creatures who had these desires and needs that ultimately led to them making a better version of it.
He says, here's a scary thought, and he goes on to share the scary thought.
What if we find out that we're aliens? That we were just dropped off here a long ass time. The Adam and Eve story is the story of the place where they created us.
I'm sure
This is a weird time where people are just starting to pay attention to so many of these subjects. And so many of these things, like, are we alone? Have there been advanced civilizations before? How did we become us?
It's been a conversation at all points in time.
But more people are having it now without fear of being labeled an idiot.
Well, it's because
I think this is a really good encapsulation of Joe Rogan as a host and his goal with this show. He said, we are getting into a time where this is being talked about more, and more people are willing to discuss certain information without being seen as an idiot. And he kind of he blazes that trail for a lot of different topics. That's why a lot of people love him. That's why a lot of people dislike him. But it provides a good example of how he uses reflections. Now, he does share some questions in this, but his questions are definitely different.
different than what everybody's religious story says. Like,
what do you think ghosts are? You think that's real?
What do you think ghosts are? Boom. Open-ended. Let's hear what you have to say.
What do you think the story of Sodom and Gomorrah is about? Because I was just
What do you think the story about Sodom and Gomorrah is about? What do you think? What do you think? These questions are directed to generate thought rather than to generate history or to generate a certain fact. It's, I want to hear what goes on in your brain. I want you to articulate that, and then we can discuss it together.
we never have evidence of that.
What do you think? Why do you think people have a reluctance to take in the idea of a creator?
Again, what do you think? These questions are targeted for thought. It's, let's talk about it. Rather than facts, you can ask questions about facts or you can ask questions about thoughts. Whenever he does ask questions about facts, it's interesting because oftentimes they can use the fact check. And young Jamie changes the dynamic, because fact checking, when we're talking here, we're going to say different things when we know it's going to pop up on a screen. For instance,
when was it written?
Far too accurate for now. So, I'm sure that.
Here it is. Emerald Tablet, also known as the Smart Dine.
And Jamie zooms in so that Joe can read it better. This definitely adds a dynamic to the conversation. And I think it allows Joe Rogan to be more exploratory in his podcast. And people are a bit more forgiving to him because they often will do fact checks. And if I recall correctly, it was whenever Alex Jones was on the podcast, then they started like really fact checking because they wanted to fact check everything he said because they knew they were going to get a whole bunch of criticism. So now that they use fact checking slows down conversation. You could be going boom, 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 boom. But then it's like, okay, well, let's Google it. Let's look it up. But it also gives people a chance to kind of huddle up, think for a second, and then pick up the conversation from either reading this or it gives them a chance to think. So the Joe Rogan podcast is very much dedicated towards exploring thought. A lot of the questions that Joe asks are a lot less about facts, a lot more about what do you think, these open-ended questions that promote thought. And the reason why he's able to do it is because he's going to have young Jamie fact check if facts do come up, be it the studio setup or Joe Rogan using reflections rather than questions, or Katt Williams being a truth teller who's contrarian. It all contributed to a conversation that lasted 3 hours and 5 minutes and covered self-driving cars and the government hearing everything we say, and Atlantis and aliens, and whether or not the Bible is real or if the Garden of Eden actually exists. All of these topics smushed together. That's the Joe Rogan Experience trademark. That's why so many people love listening to him, because they get to hear all of this different stuff and it breaks them out of the monotony of their day. If you like this video, I'd love for you to subscribe. If something stuck out to you, put it in the comments. If you feel like I missed something, let me know in the comments below. I saw this and I wanted to do a quick communication breakdown for it. The past video was Kobe Bryant. Go check it out if you want. But other than that, we'll see you next time, folks.